What is going on, guys? It's Noah here with Custom RC Mods. Welcome back to the channel. Now in today's episode, I've got my full BetaFlight 4.2.3 configuration workflow setting up a brand new flight controller on a quad. The quad we're using today is my Multi-Rotor Mania Reaper, and if you guys will recall, I had an old F4 board on here with individual ESCs previously, but I just went ahead and upgraded my entire stack with a HackRC 32-bit 4-in-1, and then also my favorite Diatone F722 20x20 board, and finally topping it off with my VTX of choice, which is a Rush Ultimate Mini. It's an 800 milliwatt VTX and it performs outstanding. So with all these new components, of course, we have to start from scratch in BetaFlight, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Like I said, we are running the latest firmware on this board, which is BetaFlight 4.2.3 at the time of shooting this video. But if you guys are a little bit before or a little bit after this time, I'm guessing a lot of the stuff will carry over, but let me know if anything's changed or if you'd like me to cover anything more in depth. Alright, so before we jump into the configuration software, let's go ahead and talk about a few things you're going to need for this process. And the first thing, of course, is your quad, and that goes without saying, but do make sure that you have your video transmitter antenna attached, because we are going to be plugging in the flight battery, and if you don't do it now, you could possibly forget, and after a few seconds of the battery being plugged in and no antenna attached to your video transmitter, there's just not going to be a way for your video transmitter to disperse that energy out, and it's going to fry itself. So that's not a good experience to have, because then you have to get a new video transmitter. It really sets you back. Make sure just put it on right now if you don't have it on already. Also, it goes without saying, but make sure to take off your props before beginning this process, because we are going to have our battery plugged in, especially when you're plugged into BetaFlight. The computer has control of the ESCs and can spool them up whenever they want. If your props are attached, it can really get hairy very quickly. So just make sure for this entire process, leave those props off, and it'll save you a lot of time and pain in the long run. So yeah, got the quad. Let's go ahead and grab the flight battery as well, of course, to configure the receiver and the motors. You're also going to need your transmitter, and I'd assume that you've already gotten your transmitter all bound up to your receiver on there. If not, that's a totally separate video, but make sure to comment down below if you'd like to see something like that. And then also, of course, you're going to need a computer that can run BetaFlight and a micro USB cable, or whatever cable that will join in with your flight controller. Some of the new ones that run DJI have a USB-C, but I'd say most of the flight controllers of today are still rocking that micro USB. If you guys have not downloaded BetaFlight yet, it is available on the GitHub page, and I'll have that link down in the description below. You can go ahead and download it from there. You get everything set up so you can start following along with this video. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the computer configuration. I'm going to go ahead and plug into my quad into the computer. I've just got my cable right here. And at this point, we don't need to plug in the battery. We're just going to plug in the flight controller. We'll have a little status LED on the inside there, and we can set the quad off to the side. Alright, so now that we're in BetaFlight, I want to point out a few things. First things first, you want to make sure you are running the latest version of this configurator. I'm running 10.7, which at this time is the newest. You can see down right here in the bottom corner is where you can tell. Just make sure that you have that updated, because you want to get the most out of your flight controller. And then up here at the top corner is where we have all our action buttons to kind of start configuring, where we can connect and where we can update the firmware. These two bars for selection, first top one is your device settings. So right here, you can see all the devices connected to the computer. On a Mac, you will see that we've got the USB modem right here, which is where the USB ports on the Mac obviously are connected to your cable, which is connected to the quad. So just select the one if it's not automatically pulled up as the active device. And then for the baud rate, you want to make sure you have 115/200 right there. That is, the most commonly used. I guess there might be other ones, and that's why there is a selector, but 115/200 is where you want to be at. You can choose to do auto connect, however I don't for some reason. But yeah, we got that out of the way. Let's talk about updating firmware. I'm not going to really cover that in this video, but you can see you can choose your target, you can choose your firmware revision, and you want to make sure that you're updated to the latest firmware. Some flight control boards come with older firmware, but Diatone is actually pretty good with theirs, and mine came flashed with 4.2.3 on it, just like that. So yeah, we're going to exit out of that, and we're actually going to go ahead and connect the board now, and you'll see a new thing in 4.2. We've got some custom defaults all ready to go on the board from from the manufacturer. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the custom defaults, because that's one thing to consider. You'll see my beepers going crazy, but a lot of times the manufacturers make the boards so that they'll work with the custom defaults only. So got to keep that in mind, because if you don't have those defaults, your board may not function properly. Anyway, let's talk about this warning that popped up right here. The accelerometer is enabled but not calibrated, so all we have to do is go ahead and hit the calibrate accelerometer button there. So we're just going to hit calibrate, and now we're good. So now that we've calibrated the accelerometer, there's not a lot left to do in this setup tab. We're going to go ahead and just run straight down the tabs. That's how I like to do it, just to make sure I don't miss anything. But the setup tab here is basically going to give us all of the information on how our flight controller is currently performing, especially over here. This is where you're going to find your arming disable flags, which are used to troubleshoot why the quadcopter isn't arming so it can take off. You'll see right now our receiver is not connected, so that's the reason that it's obviously not going to arm. But we also have a few other stats here that you might want to monitor here and there, but since we don't have anything configured yet, there's not going to be a lot to show. So let's go ahead and move on to the ports tab here. So in the ports tab, this is where we tell the flight controller of all the different peripherals we have connected. So obviously your receiver, maybe your VTX smart audio, and also potentially if you have a GPS module, all of that, we're going to have to tell BetaFlight that we are running that right in this tab. So you can see we've got a full line of UARTs, and we're going to match the UART that we soldered to the correct UART in the applicable column in this tab here. So I went ahead and soldered on my Crossfire receiver to UART 4. So I'm going to go ahead and select Serial X on UART 4. You also will notice that UART 1 has Serial RX checked on by default. That is because that is the pad that has the inverter on it. So if you're running S-Bus, there's only one pad that will correctly transmit the receiver signal into the flight control board. But because I'm running Crossfire, that does not need inversion. I can go ahead and solder to any UART that I want to. So yeah, UART 4 for that, and then my video transmitter is hooked up to UART 3, and obviously it's not an RX, so it's not just going to be a little flick of a switch. We have to go over to our peripherals under UART 3. I'm going to go ahead and select the drop down and go to VTX TBS Smart Audio there, and we are good to go. That's all I have connected up to this specific board, so we're going to go ahead and press save and reboot to save the changes. So now I'll select back up, we can go ahead and reconnect, and now we're going to move on to the configuration tab. This is the meat and potatoes of BetaFlight, where we're going to adjust a lot of the main settings on this board. There's a lot to get through. I'm going to go ahead and start at the top, and we'll work our way down to the bottom in this segment. So first things first, in this mixer tab here, you can see we've got the Quad X. Because this is a quadcopter, that is correct. We don't have to mess with that. But if you're setting up a hexacopter, that would be, obviously where you could adjust that. Again, we don't need to mess with that. But I do prefer to run props out for my motor direction. So I'm going to go ahead and reverse that so my PID loop doesn't freak out when I try to take off. That pretty much goes without saying there. Moving on over here, this is where we can select our ESC protocol, and in this case it is DShot 600 for my 32-bit HackRC ESC. Most modern ESCs will run DShot of some sort, but if you're unsure, you can always set it back to OneShot 125. That is the most basic, and all ESCs can run that. So if you're having any trouble, you can set it back to that, because if you're running super cheap individual ESCs, that might be what you're left with, I guess. You can also select bidirectional DShot in this case if you're looking to set up RPM filtering. DShot actually is bidirectional. It has a communication link that allows you to do turtle mode, which would be reversing the motors, and also use a beeper, but this bidirectional selection tool is used to specifically address RPM filtering. For now, I'm going to leave that off until I can go into RPM filtering and address that in a more dedicated manner. For the board and sensor alignment, you really shouldn't have to do anything with this unless you oriented the board in a way that was not specified by the manufacturer. So if you did not orient the board with the arrow facing forward, or if it's upside down, anything like that, you'll have to adjust these parameters like so. And you can always go ahead and check the accelerometer preview in the setup window to make sure your quad is behaving as it should. So the arrow facing forward would just be making sure everything works. But let's go ahead and go back to the configuration tab here and keep getting to work. So the accelerometer trim is also something that you won't have to mess with right off of the bat, but for your arm angle, especially if you're looking to run turtle mode, you want to go ahead and select the value 180 for that. So that's going to allow the quad to arm when it's completely upside down, especially obviously you use that when you're in turtle mode, so make sure that you have that selected. In the system configuration window, there's really not a lot that needs to be changed. I'd recommend keeping the PID, loop, and gyro update frequency the same as shipped. Don't really try to push your luck, especially right off of the bat. If you're running a lower strength processor such as an F411 or an F405 board, you're definitely not going to want to push it much past 4 kilohertz refresh rate. But on the F7, you might be able to get away with this or even the 32 kilohertz sampling rate that's available on even some of the nicer boards. But again, I wouldn't mess with any of this stuff. Leave the accelerometer on, and if you have a barometer and magnetometer, be my guest, but my board does not have those. For the craft name, this really isn't for any use, but I like to go ahead and just add it in the name of the frame, so Reaper, just like that. And then the camera tilt, I'm actually not going to do anything with this. If you guys are a beginner, you may elect to add your camera tilt of choice in there. That's essentially going to go ahead and mix your roll and your yaw together, and it will help you fly a little bit better, but that's not going to give you the raw acro flight experience, and that could throw off your flight training. So in general, I just wouldn't recommend it. Moving on to the receiver tab here, you can see my board is already set up to run a S-bus receiver, so a Futaba or a FreeSky receiver. But like I said in the earlier part of this video, I am running Crossfire. So I'm going to go ahead and select serial-based receiver like it is already, and then we can choose the type as CRSF, short for Crossfire, of course, and we are good to go with that. For my RSSI, we're not going to turn that on. Most modern receivers either send the RSSI out as a separate channel selection in the receiver tab, or they have it built in to the actual protocol sending it out. So if you're using some sort of specific instance, you will know that you need to turn this on. But again, for most of this, your RSSI can be achieved in a different way. Moving on to right here, these are the main kind of flight features that BetaFlight offers. So for my Crossfire receiver, I want to make sure I have telemetry on. If you want soft serial on, like if you're running a FreeSky RXSR or any of those other telemetry enabled receivers that can't do it directly through a UART, you will want to have that on, using like SmartPort or anything like that. I also like to throw on the LED strip because a lot of my quads, I do end up putting a little bit of flare on there with a few little LEDs here and there, just to have that on for later. But most of the other stuff besides permanent air mode, OSD, and dynamic filter, that's pretty much all that I leave going on there. Obviously, also if you have a GPS module on your quad, you know what to do. You can go ahead and select this, turn it on. I think Joshua Bardwala has a great video on how to set up your GPS module. Because I'm not running on one on this quad, we don't need to go through that. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Now, if you don't have a dedicated lost model alarm, you can go ahead and select the D-Shot beacon, and this will basically pulse the motors, which will make an audible sound and help you find the quad once you've gone down. But because I have a separate buzzer that you've probably heard every time I save and reboot, I'm going to go ahead and skip over that and go into my beeper configuration tab here. Now, there's a lot of settings, and I'm not totally sure why they all default to being on, but we're going to go ahead and select most of these off because I really only use my beeper for a few things. I use it for when my receiver comes disconnected. I use it to tell me when I'm armed and disarmed. This is especially helpful in turtle mode when the motors don't start up. So it's going to give me a little beep as soon as I flick the arm switch. So disarming and arming on. Not that. I do like to keep it on when the battery is critically low, just in case I'm totally not paying attention to my voltage meter, but I do not turn it on just for the normal battery low warnings. Turn off the GPS status. I do keep on the RX set switch on here just because that's going to allow me to turn on my beeper with a switch so I don't have to turn off my radio every single time just to get the beeper to trigger, which is really nice. And then pretty much everything else here I just turn off. I don't really use it, but if there's a specific use case, I might use one of these. But for a typical 5-inch freestyle drone, again, not really having much need for any of these things. So make sure to go ahead and save and reboot, and obviously make sure you save all the stuff because that's a lot of stuff we just changed. We're going to reconnect. And we're going to move on to the power and battery tab. There's not a lot you need to go ahead and configure here. They've done it pretty well with the cell voltages to give you those battery warnings at. And unless your flight controller manual specifically tells you to adjust the voltage or amperage meters, I wouldn't mess with that at all. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our PID tuning window. And there's not going to be a lot we do in here either. The PID profile settings are pretty good for the 4.2. Anything really past BetaFlight 4.0 doesn't really need immediate PID tuning, and in most cases you're just going to go ahead and take the quad out and fly it and make adjustments from there. There's not really any merit in dumping in some already accumulated PID values, just because every single quad is different. For this little 195mm bottom mount is going to fly totally different than a larger top mount freestyle drone, etc., etc. So we're going to skip over that. We're going to go ahead and go into the rate profile settings, and I'm going to adjust the rates here to my liking. I run standardized rates at 0.8 for the RC rate and the super rate there, and then 0.3 on the Expo, and I use that for all of my different directions. Alright, so once that is completed, we can move on to the final tab here, which is the filter settings. And essentially what filtering is it's going to give you some automatic like boost in compensation, especially in like high prop wash or high speed, jittery environments. It's just going to smooth things out. However, you don't want to just boost it to the max, because as the filtering increases, your PID loop is going to have to work harder and harder, and you're also going to put more stress on your motors because you're making more finite adjustments. So make sure just not go too crazy on this. If I know I'm running a rather conservative setup on my prop and motor choice for the weight of the quad, I'll go up 2 steps. However, on this one, I'm just going to go up 1 step to start out, and I will monitor my motor temps. If they come down completely cool, I can go up 1 more, and if they come down burning hot, I'll just go back to the default or even go down a few, just as needed. This filter settings tab has pretty much replaced the need for intricate PID tuning, just because it does such a good job, and the PIDs that are stock on the BetaFlight 4.2 boards are just really refined as is. So you're going to pretty much have a good flying quad right out of the gate. So make sure that you hit save before leaving the tab, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to a receiver. It obviously goes without saying that you need to have your transmitter on for this stage, and the first thing that you'll notice right out of the gate is that the preview is going haywire. We need to go ahead and adjust the channel mapping right here to be proper for our certain radio and receiver protocol. So right here it says TAER 1 2 3 4, so throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, 1 2 3 4 on the aux channels. We need to go ahead and switch that, in my case, from my Radiomaster TX16S and TBS Crossfire setup to a default, which would be AETR instead of that. And once we press save, you'll notice that our preview goes static, and looks like we have all the controls on here. We're rolling, we can pitch forward, backward, and we can yaw, and all that can also be monitored up here in the channel assignment monitor window. So we're going to go ahead and just confirm that we have all of the inputs proper: left, right, forward, backward, left, right, or right, left, and then throttle up and down. We've got aux 1, we've got aux 2, we've got aux 3. I'm not using aux 4 because sometimes I use that for RSSI. And then we've got aux 5 right here, and we've got aux 6. So all of my aux modes are being transmitted properly from the radio. If you guys want another video on all about how to set up the aux modes actually in the radio to be received in BetaFlight, I'd be happy to do that. Again, comment that down below. Anyway, let's go ahead and keep chugging along here. You'll notice one thing that's really important is that my endpoints are not set properly. At the farthest right, you can see it says 1929, and at the farthest left, it's at 1070. You want to make sure that it goes from 1000 to 2000 with a 1500 midpoint in your range. So at this point, we need to go ahead and make a few adjustments. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to open this note. This is what we're going to dump into the CLI. I've got it right here. It's called RXRANGE. That's the command name. And we've got channel 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then 1070 to 1929, we're basically redefining the range that the receiver can respond to the signals at. So let's go ahead and copy that from here, this little note I created. I'll post that down in the description below as well if you need to get that. Then we're gonna go ahead and paste this into the CLI, just like so. And I already have a save, so it's gonna exit out of the CLI for me. The motor's reinitialized, and we are good to go with that. Alright, so now we're back in the receiver tab, and you'll notice I go full to the right and the left on all my channels, and now we have the proper channel alignment there from 1000 to 2000. So that's all we need to do in here. All this other stuff is really niche uses depending on which protocol you're using, but for most of you, I will venture to guess that you will not be touching that. So yeah, press save just to make sure that we've got all of our configuration settings in that tab saved, and we'll move on to the modes tab. So in here, this is a lot of personal preference. Every pilot does it differently. However, I'll go ahead and show you the way that I do it. First things first, to add a range that your mode will be, your switch mode will be kind of selected on, we're gonna press that button there, and you'll see we've got auto selected. I'm gonna select aux1 for my arm channel, and then I can flip the switch back and forth to see the proper range. And I want my arming to be when it's high and my disarming to be when it's low. From there, we can go ahead and move on to angle, which is going to be on my next channel, and that's going to be on aux2, and I want that to be on aux2 high, just like that. And since this is a 3-position switch, we'll have my turtle mode in the center and then nothing on the low end of the travel, because obviously that's going to be the air mode, the acro mode that you fly freestyle in. I generally just set up angle mode as a way of rescuing my quad if my video goes out or if I just get too far away. So yeah, that's always good to have, especially if you have the room in your CPU load to afford to have that. Next, moving on to my beeper, that, just like I said in the configuration tab, is where you can go ahead and assign a certain channel to turn on the beeper. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that on aux3 high. My LED low, just in case I'm running LEDs in the future, I'm gonna set that to aux6 right here, and that's gonna be aux6 medium and high. So just like that. So it covers both the medium and the high selection for aux6. Then moving right along, there's 2 last things that we need to configure, which is the turtle mode right here, the flip over after crash. That, like I said, is going to be an aux2 medium, or the middle right there. And I like to go ahead and constrain that just so I don't accidentally bump it into turtle mode, or we have a miss register on there. And then of course, finally, my pre-arm, which is very important. This is going to make a dual switch pre-arm. I have a separate video all about that on my channel. So it's going to be on the aux5 high in this case as well. All right, so now when we're done with that, let's go ahead and press save to save our work here. And you can go ahead and test it by just cycling through each of the switches and making sure that everything works as desired. Now that we're done with that, we can go ahead and switch over to the motors tab. And since we've got the battery plugged in, we don't even have to do anything to prepare for this. Let's just go ahead and select this box saying that we understand the risks of powering up these motors on the bench. And we're going to go ahead and start off just by powering up each one of these motors. This is my motor 1, and I'm checking for motor direction at this time. So I've got my finger right here on the motor, and this is spinning a proper motor direction of props out. In this case, motor 2 is also spinning props out. Motor 3 also spinning the correct props out direction. And so is motor 4. So I do not need to go ahead and adjust anything in a separate configuration software like BLHeli 32X configurator. So that's going to be a separate video. If you guys are interested in that, make sure to go ahead and comment that down below. Next, let's go ahead and move on to the OSD configuration here. You can see that we've got a lot of stuff going on here. Essentially what we've got going on this left-hand panel is all of the different elements we can add to the OSD. So I want to add the artificial horizon. I can go ahead and add that to my display here, and then I can move it around in this little preview as much as I want. If I want to add my battery cell voltage, I can go ahead and add that in there as well, and things like that. And these 3 checkboxes in a row are used for the different OSD profiles. If you want to use different things for like long range, for racing, for freestyle, things like that, that's where you can go ahead and do that. Now for me, I don't like to have an overly cluttered OSD. Because we're in the States and we use NTSC video, I'm going to go ahead and select that, and that will crop down our video size to a more typical 4:3, so I don't get everything completely confused. And sometimes if you have that added length down here, you can get things cut off, which obviously isn't productive at all. So I'm going to add my battery voltage to the bottom left corner there, and my battery milliamp hours right there as well. This is my battery corner, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. And then I go down to the very bottom and I turn on my timer 1 and timer 2, which are the flight minutes and the power on minutes. Just like that. And then my throttle position. The throttle position is an extremely useful element, especially when you're looking back at your DVR footage and you want to see how much throttle it took to hover the quad, because honestly it's really hard to feel that out when you're not actually looking at the stick. And then of course obviously you want to make sure you have your RSSI, and those are pretty much all the added elements that I think that are extremely essential to fly the quad. But if you have a GPS connected or any other peripherals, you can go ahead and add those at will. Again, it's completely customizable. There's no really right or wrong way to do it, and every pilot does it differently. So most of the presets on here are pretty darn good for what they are, and if you want to adjust them, be my guest, but I don't really mess with them. For my warnings, I like to keep most all of them on. For some reason, the RSSI warning is not checked on by default, but obviously that's really important. You want to know if your link quality is about to tank. So any of these warnings are just good to have on at this time. And if you can read the DBM, that also might be important to you. Again, completely personal preference. For my post-flight statistics, I do go ahead and turn off all the black box stats just because I don't really use black box at the moment and I find it distracting. And then I also go ahead and turn on more of these battery voltage indicators as well as my other timer, just so I know how long it's been armed, how long it's been on, and then of course all of the battery stats on there as well. So yeah, that's about it for the OSD tab, and we're nearing the end of this all. So we need to go ahead and work in this video transmitter tab now. So this tab is all about configuring the smart audio settings for your video transmitter. You essentially have to build the VTX table of all the different frequencies that your video transmitter can operate at, which if you're doing that by hand is completely time consuming and honestly just a total waste of time, especially when you can just go to your video transmitter manufacturer's website and they often have a VTX table all ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this right here, and then take it over here to the CLI and paste it all in. Press enter. You can see all that stuff, it has been imported into the VTX tables, and we can connect it again, and you'll see right here, video transmitter, everything's outfitted the way I want it. And I'm gonna go ahead and select my channel of choice just to go ahead and set the video transmitter. Race band 8 with about 500 milliwatts of power, and all that stuff good to go. Let's go ahead, press save. So that about does it for my configuration straight out of the gate on this flight controller. As you can see, all these systems are fully operational at this time, and we're ready to go ahead and throw some props on here and get this thing up in the air. So as you can see, we can go ahead and arm the quad. The motors are spinning in each of the directions, are working properly. And there we go. That's about all we can test on the bench here, but that's a good sign, and I can't wait to get this thing up and flying with the brand new F722 flight controller here. I think this is going to fly leaps and bounds better than it did before. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, please like the video and consider subscribing to Custom RC Mods. I make helpful and entertaining videos about all things RC, and I try to post every couple of days. It'd be great if I could welcome you aboard as part of the Custom RC Mods community. As always, guys, if you have any questions about the content covered in today's episode or just about RC in general, I'd be happy to field all those down in the comment section below. I will be hanging out if you have any video requests or ideas as well, or just anything like that. Want to talk? I'm down. Thank you guys so much for the love and support, especially recently. We just passed 1,000 subscribers, and I'm really excited. I've been working at this goal for forever, and I'm really, really glad that we made it. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.